All right, guys, what's up? It's Jack, and welcome back to another video. And every once in a while, I have this thought about XDefiant to where Mark Rubin basically comes out of nowhere on Twitter and says, yeah, we did sunset the game, but in actuality, what we're actually doing is going back into development stage and keeping the game offline so that way we can finish our vision. And XDefiant is set to release at such and such. It is on its way. Hold on tight. Be ready for a ride or something like that. Now, that's obviously a fantasy that is very likely not going to come true, right? But with that being said, I do have these thoughts about what the game could have been if it was actually allowed the proper development time before release and if it wasn't rushed out by Ubisoft and all that other stuff. Because quite frankly, when I look back at it and I think about it, after all this time has passed, it becomes very clear that this game could have had quite the impact. As a matter of fact, when it actually first came out within the first month or so, it actually did have quite the impact. There were like, I don't know, either 11 or 15 million unique users or whatnot that played the game, which is great. But the game itself was launched at a state that had a lot of problems because obviously it was launched prematurely thanks to the word of Ubisoft, according to what I understand. And if I remember from what Mark Rubin mentioned in one of his latest tweets after the game went down and all that kind of stuff, and the community actually within XDefiant was actually a very passionate one. We were a smaller community, but we were definitely passionate, and we knew because of how the game released and all the kind of issues that it had. Despite all that, we knew that the game itself had an uphill battle, but we fought for it because of the developers and the kind of communication that they would have with the community. The fact that the game had no SBMM was also a big thing, so it made the game a lot more enjoyable. And at the same time, it was also an arcade shooter. Like nobody to this day, other than what Ubisoft did, right, with XDefiant, like nobody like has the guts to make an arcade shooter nowadays, right? It's all just Call of Duty. I mean, Halo's not an arcade shooter; it's an arena shooter. Battlefield 6 or Battlefield itself is Battlefield. It's not an arcade shooter, and the only other arcade shooters that existed were basically, I think some of them were PC only. Like when you look at, for instance, what's that game called? Ironside, I believe, which servers were taken offline in that game very recently, which is after like so many years. After, I think it was 10 years. I think it was up for 10 years. That has been taken offline. So it's like, man, it's like the arcade shooter is only limited to Call of Duty, which is quite sad, actually, especially when you think about how, a lot of people are saying that Call of Duty is basically soulless at this point, right? It's a soulless game. And a lot of people that say that are the ones that grew up playing Call of Duty back in the day when the genre would just hit different than what it does now. So other people would argue that it's just time, and then after a game is a franchise has been coming out every year for as long as Call of Duty has, of course it's going to lose that spark or whatever the deal is. You could argue back and forth about that, but whatever, right? But when it comes to XDefiant, though, it could have been that other game. It could have been that literally that Call of Duty alternative to where it's like, hey, if you don't like this game offers this. So I highly recommend you give it a try. And, we're talking like the game. I think if the game was given another year to a year and a half to develop, without being released at all and without having to multitask between a game that's actively on release while updating, I think if it was given an extra year and a half or so of development time, I think the game would have looked better visually. I think the netcode would have been exactly where it was supposed to be, to where the hit detection would have been perfect. I think we would have had more weapons at launch. I think we would have had even more maps on launch. I think we would have had even more factions at launch as well. I think the store could have been better. So, you'd make your bang for your buck as far as the store is concerned. I think we would have seen better advertisement, obviously. And I think we would have had, characters, very specific characters like Sam Fisher that would have been, a selectable character that you would have to buy from the store, obviously, things like that. I think there would have been another mode to where you would have some sort of horde mode eventually, with like rabbits or something like that. I remember making a video to where Mark Rubin was kind of asked a question of what would he would like to see, like way down the road and stuff like that. Ranked would have been at launch. I think you would have seen a lot of pro players playing the game. I think there would have been already some pro matches happening right now and getting ready for like an official, pro, scene, with money prizes and all that kind of stuff. Eventually, maybe a year or two down the line from now, you'd probably see your first XDefiant world champions and stuff like that. I think you would have seen a lot of content creators come out of the woodworks that literally went from 0 to, a certain amount of subs I mean, if my channel, thanks to XDefiant, got resurrected, which it did, you know what I mean? It's like so many other channels would have come to fruition and would have done really, really well. I also missed the fact that there would have been like I somehow managed to get in touch with 20 content creators or so, give or take, that had the passion and the love for XDefiant. Some of them were just streamers. Some of them were making YouTube videos and streams. Some people just made videos. Some people were actually from the Call of Duty community, for instance, like Gilmore. And, you know, he would have been one of those guys that would have participated in the creator community event that I was originally planning on trying to get everything together for that to happen. And then obviously it was announced that the game would be sunsetting, and pretty much the wind was just taken out of our sails, man, you know. And there was definitely a part of me that still wanted to do it, but all of a sudden it was like, you know, me knowing how the gaming industry works, like, well, I mean, I don't know it like someone who's literally on the inside, but me understanding how corporate works and corporate greed and all that kind of stuff, it's like no matter what we would have done as a community, even if we were to get like, you know, let's say 1,000 viewers to look at our event, for instance, which would have been a hell of an accomplishment, right? If we would have had at least 1,000 viewers or more, you know, and even in participation and all that kind of stuff, and even to, you know, gather attention, those numbers just simply wouldn't have been enough. It just wouldn't, you know, because that's the only thing that they understand. That's the only thing, you know, corporate higher ups like Ubisoft and stuff like that understand. They don't care about anything else. You know, it's like passion doesn't matter unless it's bringing in money. You know what I'm saying? So that's the unfortunate fact when it comes to games like, you know, like XDefiant, unfortunately, and with publishers breathing down their neck in terms of, you know, you got to do this and all that kind of other stuff. I mean, they literally got screwed. You know, it's like they forced them to release way ahead of time, and on top of that, it's like they had the highest expectations, and at the same time, the developers had to, you know, complete the game while the game was out, and on top of that, the developers were getting shit from a lot of community members. You know what I mean? But the ones that were passionate and the ones that were respectful, which thankfully there were a lot of those as well, you know, you know, it's like they did their best to, you know, to be understanding and to give them all the time needed. But, you know, unfortunately, there's deadlines after deadlines. And unfortunately, there has to be money that has to be made. And the game just wasn't making it because the game just didn't have enough of an appeal because it got released prematurely. It's like, you know, this is another stupid decision that was made by Ubisoft in order for them to do this. So I would have gladly waited a year and a half for XDefiant to release. Like if XDefiant were to release around this time right now, I would have gladly waited. I would have been making a shit ton of content and stuff like that. You know, so it's just one of those things, you know. But the, you know, obviously with the health thing, you know, in mind, you know, that's another thing that would have stopped me because that's kind of what I'm going through right now. But other than that, you know, it's like the game itself just had so much potential. You know, I mean, I think the prestige race would have been something that would have been officially done. I think Mark Rubin would have supported that, you know, with some prizes for people that, you know, the first 3 groups that made max prestige. I mean, I would have loved to have been able to have, like, let's say, you know, if I was able to play, I would have, you know, I would have asked Jabo Enderman to be on my team for that. Myself, let's see, myself, Jabo Enderman, and I don't think Astonish would have done it. You know, he's just too good of a player, so I don't know if I would have gotten him. But you know, and he's also an aspiring pro player as well. You know, that just is really good at FPS games. If I could have gotten myself, Jabo Enderman, and a couple of other people, like maybe Crazy, you know, because Crazy is one of the best snipers I've ever seen. You know, he's like literally the Pomage, if not better, than, you know, for Splitgate, or I'm sorry, not Splitgate, for XDefiant. So he would have been a really cool addition. And let's see who else, like at least one more other player, you know what I mean? At least 4 or maybe 5, possibly 6 at the most, you know, with all of us having, you know, 4 to 6 hour shifts, you know, on one account would have been really cool. But yeah, I mean, there's just, the game had all the potential in the world if it was allowed to cook properly. But unfortunately, things like corporate greed, things like bad decisions by higher ups and all that kind of stuff ultimately are what were the demise of the game. Because if XDefiant looked better, if XDefiant didn't have the netcode issues, if XDefiant had a you know, a store that actually, you know, gave you the bang for your buck, as well as all the factions that are within the Ubisoft universe that were, you know, in full display, plus the advertising and all that kind of stuff, it would have absolutely been an arcade shooter that would have absolutely not only survived, but it would have thrived. It really would have. You know, people to this day would still be playing it. I think also, like, people would, you know, there'd be still people that slowly but surely over time would you know, would be giving that game more and more of a shot, including the Call of Duty community. You know what I mean? So it's like you would have, you know, and the thing is, there's plenty of room for for both franchises to exist. You know what I mean? Because again, like I said, there's only one arcade shooter franchise out there that I can think of off the top of my head that is active and consistently active year after year, and that's Call of Duty. You know, it's like nobody else dares to make an arcade shooter nowadays. You know what I mean? Maybe part of it is because of what happened to XDefiant, but one of the things that people need to realize is that it was, you know, a bad decision from the higher ups to let them release the game well before it was supposed to release. So, but yeah, I miss XDefiant. Trust me, guys. If I were to tell you that I didn't, you know, I'd be a liar. I would definitely be a liar. And the game certainly had potential. It was an awesome arcade shooter with its own unique feel and flavor, with its own rule set. The maps were awesome. I liked the weapons. I liked the variety of the maps as well in terms of how they looked. You know, the factions were what they were. I just preferred gun on gun. I didn't care about all the abilities and all that kind of stuff. But hey, they worked. A lot of players liked them. It was something that both casuals and non-casuals could obviously take advantage of as well. So that was fine. But you know, and the communication from the devs is another thing, you know, and that's one of the reasons why I support Splitgate 2 as much as I do in terms of, you know, my hopes for the game. You know what I mean? It's you know, it's one of those things to where you just don't see it very often anymore. And, you know, XDefiant could have certainly been that. So, but with that being said, this is kind of like a commentary about my vision and what I foresee XDefiant would have been. So I want to know in the comment section down below, how do you guys vision XDefiant being if it released the first time properly with all the bells and whistles and with everything that was supposed to be, right? Like if Mark Rubin said, yes, let's release, you know, at this time, if that was allowed and if they had the development time in order to do so and all that kind of stuff, like, you know, how do you visualize the game being? You know, what did you fantasize or foresee happening? You know what I mean? And so with that being said, guys, it was nice to make an XDefiant video again, but to be honest, it's bittersweet because I really missed the game and what it could have been. But again, with that being said, I want to know in the comment section down below, what do you guys think? What are your thoughts? What are your opinions? Do you miss the game as much as I do? Which content creators, you know, were you watching when XDefiant was out or whatnot? And yeah, I also missed the community because there were community members that were absolutely passionate about this game, and it's something that I admire. And it just sucks sometimes that passion isn't enough. But anyway, with that being said, guys, thank you all, as always, for taking the time to watch and or listen. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll catch you later.